What is the most important weapon to a Splatoon game? Well, the obvious answer is it's the one on the cover. Splatoon 2 heavily showcased Dualie, the weapon on its cover, and it was a big staple of that game that a lot of players know about. And for Splatoon 3, the flagship weapon of that game is the Tri-Stringer, and its reputation is a lot worse. Not that it's disliked or anything, more that it hasn't really ever gotten a chance to shine yet in about 2.5 years. So today I want to talk about what went wrong to where this weapon couldn't really take off in popularity, and why didn't it succeed as well as dualies did back in Splatoon 2. So without any further delay, be sure to subscribe if you want to see more weapon breakdowns like this, and let's get started with the weapons they're based off of. Dualies has a nice advantage right off the bat. It's based off of shooters. For the most part, it behaves just like a shooter, outside of, the dodge rolls and dual reticle stuff. But that's not that complicated, and that's a good positive for it. People are very familiar with shooters. Tri-Stringer, on the other hand, is heavily based off of chargers. And while chargers have a high skill ceiling, which is great, you want players to feel reward for investing into your weapons, they also have a very high skill floor, or barrier to entry. This makes them not the greatest classes for newcomers, and obviously that's something that you'd want to fix with one of the main weapons you're adding to the game. So how does Tri-Stringer get around this with its unique qualities? Well, in flexibility. Tri-Stringer has a lot more going for it than Charger does, and mainly has 3 important strengths: the weapon's one-shot, most similar to Charger, the object damage, and the AoE. Let's get the one-shot out of the way real quick. The one-shot on Tri-Stringer is one of the hardest one-hit kills to hit in the game. Compared to Chargers, where you have to hit 1 precise shot, with Tri-Stringer you need to hit 3 entire bullets in order to get a kill. The only time it gets slightly easier is if you're aiming at someone who's already a little bit weak, and so you only need to hit 2 bullets. But for 90% of shots you're gonna take, it's basically a harder Charger. Not really fixing that problem. Object damage is another one that's not really too helpful. Don't get me wrong, it's kind of a cool strength, and I think especially in more mid-range situations, it's much better than Chargers. But at a distance, if you compare it to E-Leader, it's certainly better, but is it that much better? I'm not sure. Object damage just isn't really the most notable strength or thing you'll see in the majority of matches, and while it did help the weapon be a little bit more notable during crab meta, that was about all it really did for it in terms of normal popularity. And last up, the AoE seems like it's built around helping this problem. If you miss a shot, it has a little bit of explosion damage that can make it easier to deal small amounts of damage, as well as make the weapon more distinct. That's a great idea, if done properly. So let's talk real quick about Tri-Stringer's odd balance history. And to start, we have to go way further back than you might think. Do you guys remember the Nintendo Switch OLED trailer? The one that had like 10 seconds of Splatoon 3 footage? Well, there is one thing in the OLED trailer that we've only seen there and nowhere else, and that's Tri-Stringer's charge hold. And they clearly got rid of it and later gave it to Reflux. But it shows that at one point they were looking into giving this weapon more mobility options or some other unique attribute, but it probably overlapped with Chargers a little bit too heavily. Then about a year later in the release date trailer is the first time we see Tri-Stringer actually have a form of AoE. Before that, there was never any bolt explosions, so this was probably decently late into development, and again, most likely added to differentiate itself more from Chargers. Fast forward a little bit, and we get to the test fire. And listen, when I talk about balance changes, I get for the majority of the player base, they aren't going to care about too much of it. But here's the problem. Tri-Stringer has 2 attributes that I think everybody noticed. Let's talk about the first one of them. On launch, Tri-Stringer's paint looked like this.
Oh my god, this paint. Oh, this poor weapon, bro.
Yeah, look at the comparison with Charger. It is horrible. I don't really care that Tri-Stringer's tap shot paint wasn't that bad at the time. When you are playing the weapon and moving around, you need to be able to paint a line to move in. This is basic making Splatoon feel fun to play game design, and Tri-Stringer did not have that. It took until 8.0 for it to be able to paint a straight line. That's almost 2 years into the game. It is truly baffling. I have no idea how the weapon launched like this. And there's another problem. Tri-Stringer's AoE dealt 28 damage. If you've seen me talk about damage numbers on this channel, I have mentioned over and over and over again how important 30 damage is because it heavily combos with weapons that do 35 or 70 damage or slightly higher, which is a whole lot of weapons in the game. But do you know what else deals 35 to 70 damage? Tri-Stringer. It doesn't combo with itself.
Oh, this poor thing.
So finally getting back to the accessibility point we were talking about, the AoE solution did not work on launch, because if you missed one bullet and hit the explosion, the thing that's supposed to make it more lenient, it just dealt 98 damage. It's one thing to have a weapon that doesn't work well with others, it's a whole nother thing to have a weapon that doesn't work well with itself. This eventually also got fixed though. And in terms of balance changes, Tri-Stringer got a decent amount of pretty solid buffs. There were some other ones I didn't mention, like a slightly cheaper points for special, slightly better mobility, and a damage buff in Salmon Run, which is nice. After this point, Tri-Stringer was actually a pretty good Salmon Run weapon, so there's not much history to talk about there. Tri-Stringer is now finally in a decent spot. I wouldn't even really call it a super good main weapon. It's still very inconsistent, but at least it has its identity now. The AoE works with the weapon and has a bit better mobility. While the one-shot is still pretty tricky, at least you have more tools to work around with stuff like the weapon's paint being a more notable strength. But in order to save a weapon in this balanced spot, it's gonna need a weapon kit to really amplify it. And this is another area where Tri-Stringer kind of failed. Tri-Stringer's vanilla kit is okay. It has a sub and special that work with it, okay. Nothing here is that exceptional or that fun to use, but it's alright. If that was put in the hands of a relatively good main weapon, it would probably be fine. But it wasn't enough to save Tri-Stringer. Luckily, Incline Tri-Stringer was a lot better. I think Sprinkler and Super Chump fit the weapon a little bit more. But that kit took an entire year to get put into the game. And then on top of that, we have to talk about Super Chump. Because Super Chump on launch was about as equally pathetic as Tri-Stringer itself was. The damage and paint were so much worse, it's not even funny. And that took until 8.1 for Super Chump to get in a decent spot. I wouldn't even say this special is well balanced either. Maybe it'll also be done in around 2 years' time. Because of that, even though this kit is a lot more synergistic, not really gonna save anything. I think that the devs have been doing the right things to help fix Tri-Stringer, but it's just far too late. By the time Tri-Stringer and its kits are in a decent spot, the game's not even getting content anymore, and I still wouldn't say the work is done with this weapon, so there's just a lot more to do. At the end of the day, the Tri-Stringer was an ambitious and complex main weapon based off an already difficult class. That foundation is going to be much more difficult to work off of than dualies, which are just based off of shooters. But between a combination of that, lackluster kits, and an incredibly slow balance cycle when it came to buffs, the weapon just unfortunately was not able to have its time in the sun quite yet. Hopefully, it can at least get some buffs now. I think the Tri-Stringer players deserve it.